Rachel was not the only Scott family member that was at Columbine that day. Rachel's younger brother Craig, who has actually been here and shared their story several times, he was there as well. And Craig was a wrestler at Columbine. He was hanging out that day in the library, the worst room you could have been in where most of the shooting took place. And he was hanging out with two members of the football team. Their names were Matt and Isaiah. And as the library talking that day, they suddenly heard these noises from outside that they thought were firecrackers. Later, Craig would realize the sounds they heard were the gunshots that were killing his sister. Suddenly, a teacher ran in and ordered all the students to hide under the tables, so they did. A few minutes later, Eric and Dylan came in and began shooting. And Craig watched as 10 of his classmates were killed all around him. Many others were wounded. He told me the worst part was being under that table, looking out and seeing Eric and Dylan walking towards where they were hiding with guns in their hands. And they had nowhere to go. Boys walked right up to their table and first took their guns and aimed them at Isaiah. But before they pulled the trigger, they made fun of him for the last minute of his life because of the color of his skin. They shot and killed Isaiah, then they turned and shot and killed Matt. And Craig told me he sat under that table covered in the blood of his friends. When he looked up, he was staring at two guns that were now aimed at his head. And he told me I knew I was going to die. But just then the sprinkler system went off, and that distracted Eric and Dylan. They walked away and never came back to where Craig was sitting. Otherwise, Rachel's family would have lost 2 kids that day. I want you to hear as Craig described what happened to him and his 2 good friends.
A teacher ran in screaming. She was screaming that there were 2 kids outside the school with guns that were shooting other students. And she was in such a terror. And I didn't understand what she was saying. It didn't register. The teacher yelled at us to get all the students to get under the desks. Me and my buddy Matt got underneath the desk. And my friend Isaiah then walked by and he was looking for a place to sit, so he sat next to me. A few minutes later, we heard the gunshots inside the school. And they were coming closer and closer to the library. And my heart started pounding more and more. And I was feeling very afraid. Eric and Dylan came into the library. It was the first place that they entered, the first room. Immediately they were shooting off their guns. And I heard them yelling at students, and they were yelling to each other and shooting off their guns. And that's when me, Matt, and Isaiah looked at each other and we knew that this was really serious and we were really scared. And Isaiah was one of the very few black students in the school. And they began to make fun of Isaiah for being black. And the last thing that Isaiah heard in his life were racial slurs being made against him. And the last thing that he said was, "I want to see my mom." And they shot Isaiah with a shotgun. And then they shot my friend Matt.
7 years ago, Rachel's family invited me to join their team of speakers, which today now is more than 50 people that travel and share her story. And when they did invite me to join Rachel's challenge, Craig personally challenged me. He said, "Dave, anytime you share my sister's story, I need you to challenge every single person you meet to get rid of any prejudice or hatred they have in their hearts against anyone who's different from them." Today, this program is called Rachel's Challenge. Shortly after her death, Rachel's family found 6 journals that she had filled in her lifetime. They contained things like her hopes, her dreams, her failures, and how she wanted to eventually turn them into successes. And it's become the framework for this program, and it's inspired 5 challenges that I'm going to share with you tonight. But the first of those 5 doesn't just come from Rachel, it also comes from her brother Craig. It has to do with eliminating prejudice. How many of you in your life have been in a situation where you know that prejudice was being displayed? How many of you are a man or woman enough to admit that you were the one doing it? Because my hand is up. I didn't realize how many forms of prejudice there were. And I'm not trying to call you all out, I just don't want to feel alone because I know that I've been prejudiced in my life. I have never been racially prejudiced. I had never judged someone before I took the time to get to know them based on race or ethnicity. I always knew that was wrong. But I used to roll with a lot of friends in New York. Matt and I did. Some of them weren't the best influence on us, I'd actually go on record to say, but we thought we were pretty good at sizing people up. Whether it was the car they drove, the clothes they wore, the look on their face, the way they wore their hair. We thought we were pretty good at it. It took until I was 37 years old for a 17-year-old girl I never had the chance to meet to put me in my place. And she showed me a simple way to get rid of prejudice. Now, I know I asked some of you if you've been prejudiced before, but let me just play the prejudice game a little bit more. How many of you in your life have met someone, and the first time you met them, they just reminded you of somebody that you do not like? Ever had that happen? How many of you ran up and gave them a hug right away? So that was more hands than were up before. See, we could go through scenario after scenario of all the ways we may have been prejudiced in our life. But instead of doing that and getting a little depressed, we'd rather show you how simple it is to get rid of it. Rachel showed me, she showed millions. And it works, and it's very simple. She said, every day I'm just simply going to choose to look only for the best in the people I meet. And if I do, I won't have a problem with prejudice. See, tonight, if you all choose to look for the worst in me, I'm sure you will find something. I'm a guy, I'm an easy target, and I'm not perfect. Not even close. But what's interesting is, before you open your mouth, by the way you're looking at me, I can tell if you're judging me or not. And no matter how strong and confident I am, it will impact the way I interact with you. But if I feel like you're looking for the best in me, that will also change the quality of our interaction. So many times, prejudice happens without opening our mouths. And tonight we want to challenge you, no matter who you meet, especially for the next 30 days, only look for the best in everyone you meet. I think you'd be amazed what you can bring out in people. Because you have the power to be a positive or negative influence just by the way you look at other people. And Rachel went beyond that initial look. She said in the essay that I showed you earlier, to give people 3 chances when you first meet them, before you dare to judge or label them. She said, what if the first day you meet somebody is the worst day of their life? You don't know what they're going through at home. Give them 3 chances. But she said, if you're walking down the hall and you see somebody who looks negative, don't steer clear of them. Just walk past them and look in their eyes and smile. She said, you might catch a glimpse of their heart. And she went on to say, if you look hard enough, no matter who you're looking at, you will always find a light. And you can help that light to grow, which is their goodness, if you don't choose to ignore or walk away from someone who doesn't seem to look like they're having a great day. I want to challenge each and every one of you to rethink the way you look at people. For some of you, this is simply a confirmation of what you already do, and please keep doing it. Now, Rachel was inspired in her life by different people. And one of the people she was most inspired by is a girl who was murdered because of prejudice, and her name was Anne Frank. How many of you in this room have ever read the diary of Anne Frank? Okay, it's one of the most read books in world history. There was a copy of that diary next to Rachel's bed the day she was killed. And after Rachel's death, her family found so many ways that they believed Anne and that diary inspired Rachel to go off and do the things she did. And I want you to learn a little bit more about the powerful connections between Anne and Rachel.
Sadly, both Anne Frank and Rachel were killed from the influence of the same man, Adolf Hitler. Most people know that Anne Frank died in a concentration camp during World War II because of Hitler's prejudice against Jewish people. But what most people don't know is that Rachel died on Hitler's birthday. That was the day that Eric and Dylan chose to do the killings at Columbine. The only reason we know Anne Frank's name is because of the diary she kept before she died. What most people don't know is that Anne Frank's diary would have been destroyed, except for a lady named Miep Gies. Miep hid Anne and her family in the attic of their office for over 2 years. She put her life on the line to feed and take care of the Frank family. After Anne was captured, Miep went into the attic, picked up Anne's diary, and kept it for 2 years until Otto Frank, Anne's dad, was released from a concentration camp. Anne, her mother, and her sister all died in the prison camps. Miep was touched by Rachel's story and met with Rachel's dad, Darryl, and stepmom, Sandy, shortly before she died at the age of 100. They were some of the last people she would ever meet. And this picture of Miep waving goodbye to the skies may very well be the last photo ever taken of Miep Gies. Because of Miep, Anne Frank's diary was saved and has inspired millions of people, including Rachel Scott. who left the world her legacy through her own diaries.